"Please don't take my baby," begged the single mom. But when the adoption agency CEO heard her desperate cry, a buried secret from his past exploded into the present will, his choice: save her child or destroy both their lives forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The polished marble floors of Harrington Adoption Agency echoed with Sarah Mitchell's uncertain footsteps. Outside, rain pelted against tall windows, matching the storm of emotions in her heart. Her arms trembled as she held Emily closer, breathing in her baby's sweet powder scent. The lobby was all sleek furniture and modern art, making Sarah feel even more out of place in her worn jacket and scuffed shoes. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its light catching on the tears she was trying so hard to hold back. "Miss Mitchell?" A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "This way, please." The caseworker, Mrs. Peters, wore a crisp navy suit and carried a leather portfolio. Her heels clicked against the floor as she led Sarah down a hallway lined with photos of smiling families. "Have a seat." Mrs. Peters gestured to a chair in her office, not looking up from her computer screen. "We'll begin the intake process." Sarah sank into the chair, adjusting Emily in her arms. The baby stirred, making soft cooing sounds that usually brought joy to Sarah's heart. Today, each sweet noise felt like a knife twisting deeper. "I'll need you to fill out these forms." Mrs. Peters slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. "Standard procedure, family history, medical background, reasons for placement." She rattled off the words like items on a grocery list. Sarah stared at the papers, her vision blurring. Emily's tiny hand grabbed her finger, holding on tight as she always did. The simple gesture made Sarah's chest ache. "Island, is there maybe someone else I could talk to first?" Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Just to discuss options?" Mrs. Peters sighed, finally looking up from her screen. Her expression was professionally blank, but her eyes were cold. "Miss Mitchell, you called us. You made this appointment. If you're having second thoughts—" "No, yes, I—" Sarah struggled to find the words. Emily began to fuss, picking up on her mother's distress. "I just want to make sure this is really the only way." "We have an excellent placement already lined up," Mrs. Peters continued, ignoring Sarah's uncertainty. "The Prestons, a wonderful couple. He's a surgeon, she's a former teacher. Beautiful home in the suburbs. Your daughter would want for nothing." "Want for nothing." The words echoed in Sarah's mind. Wasn't that what every mother wanted for her child? But as she looked down at Emily's face, her heart rebelled against the thought of strangers raising her baby, no matter how perfect they seemed on paper. "They've been waiting for a healthy infant, Mrs. Peters added, her tone growing impatient. "They're willing to move forward immediately. Now, if you'll just start with the first form." "I can't." The words burst from Sarah's lips, surprising even herself. Emily startled at her mother's sudden outburst, her little face scrunching up. "I beg your pardon? Sarah took a shaky breath, rocking Emily gently. "I know I said on the phone I wanted to place her for adoption, but being here now—" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "She's my whole world. I love her so much." Mrs. Peters' expression hardened. "Miss Mitchell, love isn't always enough. You're young, single, unemployed. Think about what's best for the child." "I am thinking about her," Sarah's voice cracked. "Every second of every day, that's all I do. And I know things are hard right now, but—" "Hard?" Mrs. Peters cut in. "You have no job, no support system, and according to our initial phone consultation, you're about to be evicted. That's not just hard, that's an unsuitable environment for a child." Each word hit Sarah like a physical blow. She hunched over Emily protectively, as if she could shield her daughter from the harsh reality of their situation. "Please," Sarah whispered, her tears falling faster now, "please don't take my baby." The words hung in the air, raw and desperate. Outside the office, in the hallway, footsteps suddenly stopped. Daniel Harrington stood frozen, his hand still on the door handle of the conference room he'd just left. Board meeting notes were clutched in his other hand, forgotten as that broken plea reached his ears. He turned slowly, looking through the office's glass wall. The young mother's dark hair fell forward, hiding her face as she curled around her infant. Something about her posture, the way she held her child like it was the last time she'd ever do so, struck a chord deep within him. The scene before him blurred, overlapping with a memory he'd spent decades trying to forget. Another young mother, another baby, another desperate plea that had gone unheard. His chest tightened as the past and present merged, forcing him to remember what he'd tried so hard to bury. Mrs. Peters' voice drifted through the door, clinical and detached. "Miss Mitchell, if you're not ready to proceed with the paperwork, perhaps we should reschedule when you're more composed." Daniel watched as the young mother's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Her baby began to cry, a sound full of confusion and distress that seemed to echo down the hallway. The mother immediately shifted, murmuring soft words of comfort despite her own tears. He should walk away. This wasn't his case, wasn't his concern. The agency had procedures, protocols. As CEO, he'd helped establish many of them himself. His job was to oversee operations, not get involved in individual cases. But his feet wouldn't move. The sound of that mother's plea, "Please don't take my baby," had cracked something open inside him, something he'd sealed away 30 years ago. He stood there, briefcase in one hand, meeting notes in the other, watching through the glass as history threatened to repeat itself. The baby's cries grew louder, and Daniel saw Mrs. Peters' expression of disapproval deepen. The young mother looked up then, and for a brief moment, their eyes met through the glass. In her face, he saw the same raw desperation he'd seen in another's so long ago, the face that had haunted his dreams for decades. He remained there, motionless in the hallway, as the weight of the past pressed down on him. Every instinct told him to continue to his office, to let the situation play out as it was meant to. But that plea kept echoing in his mind, accompanied now by another voice from long ago. "Danny, please help me keep our baby." Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she received the early morning call from Harrington Adoption Agency. The receptionist's voice was polite but firm. "Mr. Harrington wanted to see her personally at 9 a.m. sharp." She spent an hour getting Emily ready, making sure her daughter's curls were neatly combed and her tiny dress was spotless. Now, standing before the heavy mahogany doors of the CEO's office, Sarah pulled Emily closer to her chest. The baby cooed softly, tiny fingers clutching her mother's worn blouse. Sarah's hand trembled as she knocked. "Come in," a deep voice called from inside. Daniel Harrington's office was exactly what Sarah had expected and feared. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city. Dark wooden shelves lined with leather-bound books covered one wall, while framed certificates and awards decorated another. Everything gleamed with wealth and authority. Daniel himself stood behind a massive desk, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his charcoal suit clearly expensive, but when he looked up, Sarah noticed something unexpected in his eyes, a flash of warmth that didn't match his intimidating surroundings. "Miss Mitchell," he said, stepping around his desk. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to a leather armchair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Would you like some coffee?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the offer. Yes, thank you." Daniel pressed a button on his desk phone. "Janet, could you bring in coffee for 2? He paused, looking at Sarah. "How do you take it?" "Just a little cream," she managed to say, carefully settling into the chair with Emily in her lap. The baby gazed around the office with wide, curious eyes. When the coffee arrived, Daniel didn't immediately start talking about paperwork or procedures. Instead, he sat in the chair across from her, his posture relaxed. "Tell me about your situation, Sarah, in your own words." The gentle tone in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah took a careful sip of coffee, buying time to gather her thoughts. I lost my job at the dental office 2 weeks ago. They were cutting staff, and I was the newest hire." Her voice wavered. "I've been looking for work, but it's hard with a baby. No one wants to hire someone who might need time off for doctor's appointments or sick days." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And your family?" Sarah's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "My parents. They haven't spoken to me since I told them I was pregnant. They said I'd ruined my life, that I'd brought shame to the family." She swallowed hard. "Emily's father disappeared as soon as he found out. I haven't heard from him since." Emily squirmed in Sarah's lap, and she automatically adjusted her hold, the movement so natural it was almost unconscious. Daniel's eyes followed the gesture. "The eviction notice came yesterday," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have 3 weeks to find somewhere else to live. My savings are almost gone." She looked down at Emily's peaceful face, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. I thought maybe giving her up would give her a better life than I can provide. But the moment I walked in here yesterday," her voice broke. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "And now?" "Now I feel like I'm betraying her," Sarah admitted, a tear sliding down her cheek. "She's all I have. The thought of giving her away, it's killing me. But what kind of life can I give her when I can't even keep a roof over our heads?" To her surprise, Daniel stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching the city below. When he finally turned back to face her, his professional mask had slipped just slightly, revealing something that looked almost like pain. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, returning to his seat, "I want you to know that your instinct to protect your child, to keep her with you, that's not wrong. In fact, it's probably the most right thing you could be feeling right now." Sarah stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. This wasn't at all what she'd expected from the CEO of an adoption agency. "There may be another way," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's talk before any decisions are final." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Daniel Harrington's office. Sarah sat in the plush leather chair, Emily sleeping peacefully in her arms. The initial tension from their morning meeting had eased somewhat, though Sarah still felt out of place in the elegant room with its dark wood furniture and impressive diplomas on the walls. Daniel had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, making him seem more approachable. He stood by the window, his back to Sarah, hands clasped behind him. The silence stretched between them until he finally turned to face her. "What I'm about to tell you," he said quietly, "I've never shared with anyone at this agency." He walked over to his desk and picked up a silver frame Sarah hadn't noticed before. The photo showed a much younger version of himself, maybe 16 or 17, with a pretty girl with long dark hair. "Her name was Rebecca," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We were high school sweethearts." He handed Sarah the frame, and she studied it carefully while keeping Emily secure in her arms. The young Daniel in the photo was beaming, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "She got pregnant our senior year," Daniel continued, settling into the chair beside Sarah rather than behind his imposing desk. "Just like you, she was 19, just like you, she wanted to keep the baby." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked up from the photo to find Daniel's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Our parents." He paused, clearing his throat. "They convinced her it was the only option. Forced her, really. They said we were too young, that we'd ruin our lives." He laughed bitterly. "They were so concerned about our futures, about college and careers. They never once asked what we wanted." Emily stirred in Sarah's arms, making soft baby sounds. Daniel's gaze fixed on the infant, and Sarah saw something raw and painful flash across his face. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I should have fought harder, should have found a way to support her, to keep our family together. Instead, I watched them wear her down day after day until she signed the papers." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened to your baby?" Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office. "I don't know," he said, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Closed adoption. Rebecca's parents arranged everything through an agency, much like this one. I've spent decades wondering, searching." He stopped at the window again. "My child would be in their 30s now. I don't even know if it was a boy or a girl." Sarah hugged Emily closer, her heart aching for the young Daniel and Rebecca, for their lost child. "Is that why you run an adoption agency?" she asked softly. He turned to face her, his professional mask completely gone. "I thought I could make it better somehow. Ensure that every adoption was truly voluntary, that birth parents were supported in whatever choice they made. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older and very tired. But the system. It's more complicated than I imagined. Money talks. Influence matters. Sometimes I wonder if I've only become part of the problem. Sarah found herself reaching out to touch his arm, surprising them both. You're trying to help. That matters. Daniel gave her a grateful look. When I heard you yesterday begging not to lose your baby, it was like hearing Rebecca all over again. I couldn't just walk away. What happened to her? Sarah asked. Rebecca? She moved away right after the adoption. Last I heard, she never had other children. He picked up the photo frame, studying it with regret. We both went to college like our parents wanted. Both built successful careers. But there's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder about our child, that I don't regret not being stronger. Sarah looked down at Emily's peaceful face, her perfect tiny features. I understand why you're telling me this, she said slowly, but I'm not sure what to do with it. Daniel leaned forward, his voice earnest. I'm telling you because I want you to know you're not alone. And because I want you to understand that whatever choice you make needs to be yours, not what your parents want, not what society expects, not what people like me in positions of authority think is best. For the first time since walking into the agency, Sarah felt tears of relief rather than despair. This man, this powerful CEO, understood her fear, her pain, her desperate love for her child. She wasn't just another case number to him. Thank you, she whispered, meaning it with all her heart. Daniel stood, straightening his tie and visibly pulling himself back together. I can't promise anything, he said, but I'd like to explore some options with you. There might be resources, support systems we can put in place. Would you be willing to meet again tomorrow? Sarah nodded, hope flickering to life in her chest. She gathered her things, carefully adjusting Emily in her arms. Daniel held the office door open for her, and she stepped out into the waiting room, her mind already racing with possibilities. That's when she saw them, a well-dressed couple, sitting on the pristine couch. The woman's expensive jewelry caught the light as she turned to her husband, saying, "That must be Emily. Isn't she beautiful?" The spark of hope in Sarah's chest flickered painfully as she clutched her daughter closer, hurrying past them toward the exit. Sarah's heart stopped when she heard the name Preston float through the waiting room. She pressed herself against the wall next to Daniel's office door. Emily snuggled close to her chest. The receptionist's voice carried clearly across the quiet space. Mr. and Mrs. Preston, it's wonderful to see you again. The board members mentioned you'd be stopping by today about your match. Yes, we're so excited, a woman's voice replied, dripping with refined elegance. We heard it's a beautiful baby girl, just a few months old. Perfect timing, really. Sarah's fingers trembled as she stroked Emily's soft hair. Her daughter stirred but stayed asleep, unaware of how her mother's world was crumbling. The mother is young, I understand? A male voice asked. That's usually best, they're more reasonable about these things. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. The way they talked about her, like she was just some inconvenient detail to be handled. She glanced down at Emily's peaceful face, those tiny fingers curled into a fist, and anger surged through her body. Before she could stop herself, Sarah burst back into Daniel's office. He looked up from his desk, startled by her sudden entrance. The Prestons, she said, her voice shaking. They're out there talking about my baby like they've already bought her. Daniel's face fell, and he slowly set down his pen. Sarah, please sit down. No. She held Emily tighter. Tell me what's going on. Right now. He stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. The board. They had already begun preliminary proceedings with the Prestons before you came in today. Preliminary proceedings? Sarah's voice cracked. What does that mean? The Prestons are significant benefactors of this agency. They've been trying to adopt for years, and when your initial inquiry came in last week. Last week? Sarah cut him off. I only called for information. I never agreed to anything. Daniel turned to face her, his expression pained. In these situations, the board often moves quickly to secure placement with preferred families. Preferred families? Sarah's voice rose, and Emily stirred against her chest. She forced herself to lower her volume. You mean, rich families? Who donate money? Sarah, please understand. The Prestons can provide everything Emily could ever need. The best schools, opportunities, advantages. She needs her mother. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. How could you sit there, tell me about your own baby being taken away, and still be part of this? Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking older. You're right. I should have told you immediately, but when I heard your story, saw how much you love Emily, I thought maybe we could find another way. There is no other way, is there? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The board's already decided. Nothing is final, Daniel said quickly. But the Prestons, they have considerable influence. Their lawyers are very aggressive, and they've already filed preliminary paperwork. Sarah walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. Regular people going about their lives, not knowing her world was shattering. Emily made a small sound in her sleep, and Sarah pressed a kiss to her forehead. What happens if I say no? She asked, not turning around. Daniel's silence told her everything she needed to know, but he answered anyway. They could make things very difficult. Legal battles, custody challenges. They might even try to prove you're an unfit mother due to your financial situation. Sarah turned back to face him, steel entering her voice. So that's it? Because I'm poor and they're rich, they get to steal my baby? Sarah, no one is stealing. Really? Because that's exactly what it sounds like. She walked to his desk, Emily secure in one arm, and placed her other palm flat on the polished wood. Let me be very clear, Mr. Harrington. I came here because I thought I was doing the right thing for my daughter, because I was scared and desperate. But I will not let anyone take her from me. Daniel met her gaze, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. The fight ahead will be hard. I don't care. Sarah straightened up, holding Emily close. She's my daughter, not some product for rich people to purchase, not a way for your board to curry favor. She's my baby. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. You know what it's like to lose a child, Mr. Harrington. How could you be part of doing that to someone else? Without waiting for an answer, Sarah walked out. She moved quickly through the waiting room, keeping her eyes forward, though she could feel the Prestons watching her. The woman started to speak, but Sarah pushed through the heavy glass doors before she could hear the words. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and harsh. Sarah's legs felt weak, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, holding Emily like she could protect her from the whole world. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities, lawyers, courts, losing her baby to people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be overcome. But when Emily stirred and blinked up at her with those trusting eyes, Sarah knew she would fight. She might not have money or influence or powerful friends, but she had something the Prestons never would. She was Emily's mother, and no one could change that. It's okay, sweet girl, she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. Mama's got you, and I'm not letting you go. Sarah sat cross-legged on her threadbare couch, balancing a cup of instant noodles in one hand, while gently rocking Emily's second-hand bassinet with the other. The spring rain hadn't let up, and a steady drip-drip from a leak in the corner of her apartment kept time with her daughter's soft breathing. Bills were scattered across her coffee table, final notices in angry red letters. The electricity bill was 2 months overdue, and her landlord had slipped another late rent reminder under her door this morning. The thought of losing this tiny, drafty apartment made her chest tighten. Even with its leaky ceiling and temperamental heating, it was home. What am I going to do, sweet girl? Sarah whispered, her voice catching. Emily cooed in response, tiny fingers reaching up toward her mother's face. A tear splashed into Sarah's noodles, and she set the cup down, her appetite gone. The adoption agency's pristine offices felt like they belonged to another world. The Prestons, with their designer clothes and confident smiles, could give Emily everything Sarah couldn't. A big house, the best schools, vacations, and birthday parties with pony rides. The thought made her stomach churn. But they can't give her my love, Sarah said fiercely, lifting Emily from the bassinet. She cradled her daughter close, breathing in her baby powder scent. They can't give her my heart. Emily's wispy hair tickled Sarah's chin as she began their nightly routine of gentle swaying and humming. The same lullaby her own mother used to sing before Sarah's pregnancy had caused such disappointment that her parents stopped speaking to her altogether. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, making her jump. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Sarah almost let it go to voicemail. Probably another debt collector. But something made her answer. "Hello? Sarah. This is Daniel Harrington." She sat up straighter, clutching Emily closer. "Mr. Harrington? How did you get my number?" "From your intake forms," he said, his usual businesslike tone softened by what sounded like concern. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been thinking about your situation." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm not changing my mind about Emily. That's not why I'm calling," Daniel said quickly. I want to help." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah sank back against the couch cushions, confusion replacing her defensive stance. "Help? How?" "I've made some calls," Daniel continued. "There's a daycare center downtown that works with low-income families. They have a sliding-scale payment system, and I know they currently have openings in their infant room." Sarah's hand trembled as she adjusted Emily's blanket. "I can't afford daycare right now. I don't even have a job." "About that?" Daniel's voice grew more animated. "I have some contacts at several companies that are hiring. Entry-level positions with training provided. And," he paused, "there's something else. I know of a church, Grace Community Chapel. They have a program specifically for single mothers, support groups, practical assistance, even emergency financial help sometimes." "A church?" Sarah's voice wavered. She hadn't stepped foot in one since her parents had stopped taking her calls. "I don't know. The pastor there, Jim, is an old friend," Daniel explained. "His wife runs the Single Mothers program. They're good people, Sarah. Real people who want to help, not judge." Emily stirred in Sarah's arms, making little snuffling noises. Sarah pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead, thinking of all the times she'd prayed for help these past months, wondering if anyone was listening. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't even know me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because 30 years ago, someone should have done this for my girlfriend. Someone should have shown us there were options besides giving up our baby." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Everything feels so impossible right now." "I know," Daniel said gently. "But you don't have to figure it out alone. Will you at least come to the church this Sunday? Meet some of the people there? I'll introduce you to Pastor Jim and his wife." Emily chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, as if casting her vote. Sarah looked down at her daughter's trusting face, those bright eyes that held her whole world. "What time are the services?" she asked. 10 o'clock, Daniel replied, relief evident in his voice. "I can meet you outside if you'd like. No pressure, just a chance to see if it feels right." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering all the times her mother had told her that God worked in mysterious ways. Maybe this was one of those times. Maybe help could come from unexpected places, even from a CEO she'd thought was her enemy just that morning. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." After they hung up, Sarah held Emily up so they were face to face. Her daughter's smile, still toothless but brilliant, made her heart swell with love, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "Maybe God hasn't forgotten us," she whispered to Emily. The old church bells chimed 9 times as Sarah climbed the worn stone steps, clutching Emily close to her chest. Her heart fluttered with anxiety. She hadn't been to church since her parents had kicked her out, and the memory of their disappointment still stung. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and warm light spilled onto the entrance steps. Inside, the sanctuary glowed, with morning sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies wafted from somewhere nearby. "Welcome, dear." A silver-haired woman, in a floral dress, approached with open arms. Her face was lined with wrinkles that spoke of years of smiling. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins, and who do we have here?" Sarah shifted Emily in her arms. "This is Emily. I'm Sarah." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "What a precious little angel," Mrs. Jenkins cooed, gently touching Emily's cheek. The baby gurgled, and grabbed her finger, making the older woman laugh. "Come on, let's get you both settled." Mrs. Jenkins guided them to a pew near the middle of the church, where a few other young mothers sat with their children. Sarah noticed Daniel standing quietly at the back, his usual business suit replaced by casual slacks and a sweater. He gave her a small nod, but kept his distance. "Now Sarah, Mrs. Jenkins said, helping her arrange the diaper bag, "I run the church nursery during services. Would you like me to take this little sweetheart so you can focus on the sermon?" Sarah hesitated, instinctively pulling Emily closer. Mrs. Jenkins seemed to understand immediately. "You can sit right here, dear. The nursery has windows facing the sanctuary. You'll be able to see her the whole time." After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. Mrs. Jenkins carefully took Emily, speaking softly to the baby as she carried her to the nursery. True to her word, Sarah could see them clearly through the large windows. The service began with familiar hymns that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. The sense of community, the peaceful atmosphere, the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself. Throughout the service, she kept glancing at Emily, who seemed content in Mrs. Jenkins' arms. The older woman was walking around the nursery, showing Emily the colorful pictures on the walls and introducing her to the other babies. After the service, Mrs. Jenkins brought Emily back, along with a plate of cookies and coffee. "Come join us in the fellowship hall," she insisted. "We'd love to get to know you both better." In the bright fellowship hall, Sarah found herself surrounded by welcoming faces. Young mothers shared stories of sleepless nights and growing pains. Older women offered advice and encouragement. Someone pressed a casserole dish into her hands, insisting she take it home. Mrs. Jenkins stayed by her side, a steady presence that reminded Sarah of the grandmother she'd never had. "You know, Mrs." Jenkins said as they sat at a table together, "I watch little ones during the week too. Been doing it for 30 years now." Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean, like daycare?" "Exactly like daycare," Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "And I have an opening right now if you're interested. It would give you time to look for work, get back on your feet." Sarah glanced across the room where Daniel was chatting with the pastor. Had he arranged this? He caught her eye and quickly looked away. I couldn't afford it," Sarah admitted, her cheeks burning. Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand. "Dear, that's what church family is for. We help each other through the rough patches. The Lord provides, and sometimes He does it through His people." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." "Because everyone needs someone in their corner, sweetheart, and something tells me you've been standing alone for far too long." Emily chose that moment to wake up, her tiny face scrunching up with hunger. Mrs. Jenkins produced a bottle warmer from her massive purse. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Sarah handed Emily over, watching in amazement as Mrs. Jenkins expertly settled the baby and tested the bottle temperature. "You really have been doing this for 30 years, haven't you?" "Indeed I have. And I've never met a mother who didn't have what it takes, deep down inside. Sometimes they just need a little help remembering that." As the fellowship hour wound down, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. She had phone numbers from other young mothers, a casserole for dinner, and most importantly, a plan for childcare that would allow her to job hunt. Daniel approached as she was gathering her things. "I see you've met Mrs. Jenkins," he said quietly. "Did you set this up?" Sarah asked. He shook his head. "I just opened the door. Everything else? That's all Mrs. Jenkins. She has a way of knowing exactly who needs help and how to provide it." Sarah nodded, touched by his honesty. "Thank you for opening the door." Mrs. Jenkins walked them to the church entrance, giving Sarah a warm hug. "We'll start tomorrow at 8, she said firmly. "Don't worry about paperwork or payments right now. We'll sort all that out later." The spring air felt fresh and full of possibility as Sarah descended the church steps with Emily. She was already planning which businesses she would visit tomorrow, resume in hand. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. Then she saw it. A black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the morning Sunday. Even through the glare, she could make out the Prestons' faces watching her. The hope that had been building all morning turned to ice in her chest. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds in Daniel's office as Sarah sat across from him, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Without Emily's familiar weight in her arms, she felt oddly vulnerable. But Mrs. Jenkins had insisted on watching the baby, saying Sarah needed to focus on this important meeting. "I won't give her up," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I know the Prestons have money and influence, but Emily is my daughter." Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. His suit jacket hung on a nearby coat rack, and his tie was slightly loosened, small signs that he was letting his professional guard down. "The Prestons aren't just wealthy, Sarah, they're connected. They've donated millions to this agency, and they sit on several charitable boards in the city. Fighting them won't be easy." Sarah's throat tightened. "Are you saying I should give up?" "No." Daniel stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. "I'm saying you need to be prepared for what's coming. They'll investigate every aspect of your life, your finances, your living situation, your support system. They'll try to prove you're an unfit mother." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Then help me, please. You're the only one who understands what's at stake." Daniel turned, his expression softening. "I already have some ideas. First, you need steady employment, something with regular hours and benefits if possible. Next, we need to document everything about Emily's care. Medical checkups, vaccinations, daily routines. We'll build a paper trail showing you're a responsible mother." Sarah pulled out a small notebook from her purse and started taking notes, her hand trembling slightly. "What else?" "You'll need character references. Mrs. Jenkins seems to have taken a shine to you. That's good. The church community can be powerful witnesses to your character. And you'll need a stable living situation." "My apartment." Sarah's voice trailed off. "Is it month to month?" She nodded. "We might be able to find you something better, maybe even closer to potential jobs. There are some programs that help single mothers with housing assistance." For the next hour, Daniel outlined a detailed plan. Sarah's head spun with information about legal aid resources, parenting classes, and budget management workshops. But beneath the overwhelming details, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked finally. "You could lose your job." Daniel's face darkened for a moment. 25 years ago, I let someone else make decisions about my child's future. I've regretted it every day since." He picked up a pen, turning it over in his hands. "Maybe this is my chance to make things right, in some small way." Sarah stood, gathering her notes. "I won't let you down." "No," Daniel said quietly. "You won't let Emily down. That's what matters." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "This is my personal cell number. If you need anything, advice, resources, or just someone to talk to, call me. Day or night." Sarah took the card, holding it like it was made of gold. "Thank you." That evening, after picking up Emily from Mrs. Jenkins' house, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with her laptop open. Emily dozed in her second-hand bassinet nearby, making small snuffling sounds in her sleep. The grocery store's online application form glowed on the screen. Sarah filled in her details carefully: her previous retail experience, her high school diploma, her availability for different shifts. Her hands hovered over the keyboard when she reached the References section. After a moment's hesitation, she typed in Mrs. Jenkins' name and the contact information for her former supervisor at the clothing store. The position was for a full-time cashier at Morton's Market, just 3 blocks from her apartment. The starting pay wasn't much, but it included health insurance after 90 days. More importantly, it was steady work with regular hours, exactly what Daniel said she needed to prove stability. Sarah glanced at Emily's peaceful face and took a deep breath. Then she clicked, Submit, Application. The confirmation page appeared. "Thank you for applying to Morton's Market. We will review your application and contact you if you meet our current needs." Sarah closed the laptop and walked over to Emily's bassinet. She gently stroked her daughter's cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "We can do this, baby girl," she whispered. Mommy's going to fight for you, and we're not alone anymore." The streetlights outside cast a gentle glow through the thin curtains, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. Sarah felt the familiar anxiety churning in her stomach, but now it was mixed with something else: determination. Tomorrow, she would start working on the next items on Daniel's list. One step at a time, she would build a life that no one could tear apart. She picked up Daniel's business card from the table and placed it carefully in her wallet. Whatever came next, she had people in her corner now. For the first time since she'd walked into the adoption agency, Sarah felt like she might actually win this fight. Sarah stood outside Miller's grocery, smoothing her only dress shirt. A pale blue cotton blend Mrs. Jenkins had helped her iron that morning. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed as customers came and went, each sound making her jump slightly. She touched the simple pearl earrings Daniel had suggested she borrow from Mrs. Jenkins. A small detail, he said, would help her appear more professional. Remember, Daniel had coached her yesterday. Make eye contact. Speak clearly. You're not asking for charity. You're offering them a reliable employee. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed through the doors. The cool air conditioning hit her face as she made her way to the customer service desk. An elderly clerk looked up from her magazine. "I have an interview with Mr. Peterson?" Sarah's voice quavered slightly. "Third door on the right, past the dairy section," the clerk pointed with a weathered hand. Sarah walked through the store, her sensible shoes clicking against the linoleum. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery made her stomach growl. She'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. She found the door marked "Store Manager" and knocked. "Come in," called a cheerful voice. Mr. Peterson was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and a neat nameplate on his desk reading, "Dave Peterson." He stood to shake her hand. "You must be Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, sir." She gripped his hand firmly, just as Daniel had practiced with her. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I see you're applying for our part-time cashier position." "Yes, sir. I have some experience handling cash from my previous job at the mall, and I'm good with numbers." She kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I notice a gap in your employment history?" He glanced at her application. Sarah had prepared for this question. "Yes, I took some time off for the birth of my daughter. But now I'm ready to return to work, and I have reliable childcare arranged." Mr. Peterson nodded, making a note. "Tell me about your availability." "I can work mornings and early afternoons, Monday through Friday. I'm also available some weekends if needed." She'd coordinated these hours carefully with Mrs. Jenkins and the church daycare schedule. The interview continued, and Sarah found herself growing more confident with each question. She remembered Daniel's advice about highlighting her strengths, her attention to detail, her experience with customer service, her willingness to learn. "Well, Sarah," Mr. Peterson said after about 20 minutes, "I like what I see here. When can you start?" Relief flooded through her. "Really? I mean, I can start immediately." "Excellent. Let's get you started next Monday. We'll begin with 25 hours a week, with potential for more as you learn the ropes. Starting pay is $12 per hour, with a review after 90 days. Sarah did the quick math in her head. It wasn't much, but combined with her savings and careful budgeting, it could work. It had to work. "Thank you so much, Mr. Peterson. I won't let you down." After finishing the paperwork, Sarah practically floated out of the store. She pulled out her phone to text Mrs. Jenkins the good news, then remembered she needed to check on Emily. The church daycare was only a few blocks away. Sarah hurried along the sidewalk, her step lighter than it had been in weeks. Through the daycare's window, she could see Mrs. Jenkins rocking Emily, while chatting with Miss Martha, the daycare director. "There's my sweet girl," Sarah called as she entered. Emily's face lit up at her mother's voice, tiny arms reaching out. Mrs. Jenkins beamed. "She's been an angel all morning. How did it go?" "I got the job." Sarah scooped Emily into her arms, breathing in her baby powder scent. "I start Monday." "Oh, praise the Lord." Mrs. Jenkins clapped her hands together. "I just knew you would." Miss Martha approached with a folder. "We've got all your paperwork processed for the daycare program. Emily will be well taken care of while you work, Sarah. We've been doing this for 30 years. Sarah hugged Emily closer. Thank you both so much. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what community is for, dear. Mrs. Jenkins patted her arm. Now, do you need a ride home? No, thank you. It's such a nice day. I think we'll walk. The afternoon sun warmed their faces as Sarah carried Emily home, pointing out dogs and trees to her curious daughter. Everything felt possible now. She could make rent, buy groceries, maybe even start a small savings account. But as they approached their apartment building, Sarah's steps slowed. Something white was taped to her door, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her heart began to pound. Shifting Emily to her hip, Sarah reached for the paper with trembling fingers. The message was typed in bold letters. Give up now, or you'll regret it. Sarah quickly crumpled the paper and shoved it into her pocket, fumbling with her keys as she rushed inside. She double-locked the door behind her, then sank onto the worn couch, holding Emily tightly. All the confidence and hope from her successful interview drained away, replaced by a cold knot of fear in her stomach. The Prestons were making it clear. They weren't going to let her go without a fight. The fluorescent lights of Miller's grocery buzzed overhead as Sarah restocked the candy display near Register 3. She'd been working there for a week now, grateful for the steady paycheck, even if it wasn't much. Her fingers moved mechanically, arranging chocolate bars in neat rows while her mind wandered to Emily, safe at the church daycare with Mrs. Jenkins. Two middle-aged women approached her register, their shopping cart loaded with organic produce and wine. Sarah straightened up, putting on her best customer service smile. But they didn't come to check out. Instead, they lingered by the magazine rack, speaking in stage whispers. "That's her," the first woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. "The one trying to keep her baby from the Prestons." "I heard she lives in that run-down apartment complex on Cedar Street," the second woman replied. "Can you imagine raising a child there?" Sarah's hands trembled as she continued stocking candy bars, pretending not to hear. But their words cut deep, each one like a small knife in her heart. "The Prestons would give that baby everything," the first woman continued. "Private schools, music lessons, vacations. It's selfish, really, keeping the child in poverty." Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to turn around, to tell them they knew nothing about her love for Emily, about the way her daughter's smile lit up their tiny apartment each morning. Instead, she kept her head down, blinking back tears. Later that day, during her lunch break, Sarah sat alone in the break room, scrolling through her phone. Her heart sank as she saw new posts in the local community Facebook group. Someone had shared an article about irresponsible young mothers and tagged her name in the comments. How can someone who can barely feed herself properly care for an infant? The Prestons built the new children's wing at the hospital. They'd be amazing parents. Some people just aren't fit to be mothers. The comments blurred as tears filled her eyes. She quickly closed the app, but the damage was done. The words echoed in her head, feeding the doubts that already haunted her sleepless nights. That afternoon, Daniel visited her at work, buying a few items through her checkout line. His presence was reassuring, like a protective shield against the whispers and stares. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly as she scanned his groceries. "They're everywhere," Sarah whispered back, her voice breaking slightly. "The rumors, the comments. People look at me like I'm some kind of monster." Daniel's face hardened. "The Prestons are using their influence to pressure you. But remember, Sarah, they're attacking you because they're afraid. They know that what you're doing, fighting for your child, that's real strength. But what if they're right?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "What if Emily would be better off with them? They could give her everything I can't." "Money isn't everything," Daniel said firmly. "Emily needs her mother's love more than she needs private schools or fancy vacations. Trust me, I know what it's like to lose a child. No amount of wealth can replace that bond." Sarah nodded, but the doubt had taken root deep inside her. She finished her shift mechanically, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the aisles. That evening, after picking up Emily from Mrs. Jenkins, Sarah returned to their small apartment. The threatening letter from earlier in the week was still on her kitchen counter, its words burning in her memory. She fed Emily, bathed her, and got her ready for bed, going through the motions while her mind raced with worries. Once Emily was asleep in her crib, Sarah stood watching her daughter's peaceful face in the soft glow of the nightlight. Tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket, rosebud lips slightly parted in sleep. Emily looked like an angel, completely unaware of the storm raging around her. The tears Sarah had been holding back all day finally broke free. She gripped the edge of the crib, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion, "give me strength. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Everyone thinks I'm wrong, that I'm being selfish, but she's my baby, my Emily." She reached down to stroke Emily's soft cheek, feeling the warm puff of her daughter's breath against her hand. "I love you so much," she whispered through her tears. "I just want to give you the best life possible, but maybe," her voice caught on a sob, "maybe they're right. Maybe the best life isn't with me." Emily stirred slightly in her sleep, making those tiny baby sounds that never failed to melt Sarah's heart. For a moment, all she could do was stand there in the darkness, crying and praying, while her daughter slept peacefully below. The weight of the day, the cruel whispers, the judgmental stares, and the online comments crashed over her in waves. Each tear that fell represented another doubt, another fear, another moment of wondering if she was strong enough to keep fighting. In the quiet of the night, Sarah continued her silent prayer, desperately seeking the strength to face another day, to weather another storm of criticism, to keep believing that a mother's love was worth more than all the wealth the Prestons could offer. The church hall buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling the wooden pews one by one. Sarah sat in the front row, Emily sleeping peacefully in her arms, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket Mrs. Jenkins had knitted. The evening sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn carpet. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," Mrs. Jenkins whispered, patting Sarah's hand, her weathered face creased with concern. "I need to," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "For Emily. For all the others like me." The forum began with Pastor Roberts offering a brief prayer. Then Mrs. Jenkins stepped up to the podium, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. "Tonight, we're here to listen," she announced, her voice steady and clear. "To hear stories that need telling, to understand struggles that often remain hidden." One by one, women began sharing their stories. A gray-haired lady spoke of giving up her baby 40 years ago, her voice breaking as she described how she still thought of him every birthday. A middle-aged woman recalled being 16 and terrified, pressured by her parents and their church to do the right thing. A young mother detailed her fight against a system that seemed designed to separate poor women from their children. Sarah's heart pounded as she listened, Emily's warm weight in her arms anchoring her to the present. When it was her turn, Mrs. Jenkins offered to hold Emily. Sarah approached the podium, her legs shaking. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she began, gripping the wooden edges of the podium. "And that beautiful baby girl is Emily, my daughter." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "A month ago, I walked into Harrington Adoption Agency believing I had no choice. I was jobless, alone, and scared. The system told me I wasn't enough for my baby." The words came easier now, flowing from a place of raw truth. But being a mother isn't about having the biggest house or the most money. It's about love, sacrifice, and fighting for your child with everything you have. She looked at Emily, peaceful in Mrs. Jenkins' arms. "I refuse to let anyone tell me I'm not enough for my daughter." Quiet sniffles echoed through the church. Sarah saw tissues being passed, heads nodding in understanding. In the back row, she spotted Daniel Harrington, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled, his face drawn with emotion. To her surprise, Daniel stood up and made his way to the front. He hadn't been scheduled to speak, but something in his expression told Sarah this wasn't an impulsive decision. "I wasn't planning to share tonight," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "But these brave women have shown me that silence only perpetuates pain." He loosened his tie, a gesture that made him seem suddenly human, vulnerable. 30 years ago, I was 18 years old. My girlfriend and I were young, scared, and in love. When she got pregnant, our families took control. They decided adoption was the only option. His hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. I watched helplessly as she was sent away to a home for unwed mothers. I wasn't allowed to contact her. When she returned months later, our baby was gone. The church was completely silent now, every person leaning forward hanging on his words. I built my career in adoption, telling myself I was helping create families. But too often, I've seen the same patterns repeat. Pressure, manipulation, the idea that money equals good parenting. He paused, swallowing hard. I don't know where my child is today. I don't know if they know they were loved, wanted. That haunts me every day. Tears streamed openly down his face now. When I heard Sarah's plea in my agency, it broke something in me. I saw my girlfriend from all those years ago. I saw every mother who's been told she isn't enough. He turned to face Sarah directly. You are enough, Sarah. Every mother here is enough, and it's time we stop letting money and power determine who deserves to raise their child. By the time Daniel finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Even Pastor Roberts was wiping his face with his handkerchief. Mrs. Jenkins brought Emily back to Sarah, and the baby stirred, reaching up to touch her mother's tear-stained cheeks. The forum concluded with a prayer circle, but it felt different now, charged with purpose and solidarity. Women exchanged phone numbers, hugged, promised to support each other. Daniel stood to the side, accepting quiet thanks from those who approached him, looking both drained and somehow lighter. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah gathered Emily's diaper bag and prepared to leave. The setting sun painted the church steps golden, and a cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. She held Emily close, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. "We can do this," she whispered to her daughter, her voice filled with newfound determination. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the park's grass, as Sarah spread out a checkered blanket under a sprawling oak tree. Emily, dressed in a tiny yellow sundress that Mrs. Jenkins had given her, cooed and wiggled her toes in the warm afternoon light. Around them, church members bustled about, setting up folding chairs and laying out dishes on portable tables. "Here, let me help you with that," Sarah called out to Mrs. Jenkins, who was struggling with a heavy casserole dish. She carefully placed Emily on the blanket and hurried over. Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly. "Oh, thank you, dear. And look at Miss Emily in that dress. I knew it would be perfect on her." The sight of so many people gathering just to support her and Emily made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. Just a few weeks ago, she'd felt completely alone. Now the park was filled with familiar faces, the young couple who'd offered her rides to work, the retired teacher who'd helped her create a budget, and even the teenage girls who took turns playing with Emily during coffee hour after services. "Sarah!" a cheerful voice called out. She turned to see Daniel walking toward them, looking different in casual clothes instead of his usual suit. He carried a grocery bag in one hand and a small gift-wrapped package in the other. "You made it," Sarah said, surprised but pleased. Even after all his help, she still sometimes found it hard to believe that the CEO of Harrington Adoption Agency had become one of her strongest allies. "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel replied, setting down his contributions. "And how's our little star today?" He crouched down beside Emily, who grabbed at his finger with her tiny hand. Sarah watched as Emily's face lit up with a toothless grin. "She's been extra giggly today. I think she knows it's a special afternoon." More church members arrived, each bringing food and warm greetings. The tables soon overflowed with homemade dishes, Mrs. Peterson's famous potato salad, Mr. Rodriguez's grilled chicken, and enough desserts to feed twice their number. "Before we eat," announced Pastor Mike, "I'd like us all to join hands and thank God for bringing Sarah and Emily into our lives." Sarah felt Mrs. Jenkins's weathered hand slip into hers on one side and Daniel's steady grip on the other. As the prayer began, she opened her eyes for a moment, taking in the circle of people surrounding her and Emily. Tears welled up, but for once, they were tears of joy. After the prayer, plates were filled and conversation flowed easily. Sarah sat cross-legged on the blanket, balancing Emily in her lap while trying to eat a piece of fried chicken. Daniel settled nearby, occasionally making silly faces at Emily that made her giggle. "You know," he said quietly, I haven't been to a church picnic since I was a teenager. Sarah noticed the distant look in his eyes. Thinking about your own baby? He nodded. But today feels like healing. Seeing you fight so hard for Emily, watching this community embrace you both, it gives me hope. Mrs. Jenkins approached with a paper plate piled high with desserts. You two need to try my lemon squares, she insisted, setting the plate between them. And Sarah, honey, let me hold that precious girl while you eat properly. Sarah handed Emily over gratefully, watching as Mrs. Jenkins swayed gently, humming a lullaby. The simple act of being able to use both hands to eat felt like luxury. A group of children kicked a soccer ball nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The afternoon sun warmed Sarah's face as she leaned back on her hands, taking in the moment. Her new work uniform hung freshly pressed in her closet at home. Her first paycheck, though small, had helped buy Emily new diapers. The church's daycare center had agreed to watch Emily during her shifts at a reduced rate. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. Open this when you get home, Daniel said, pushing the small wrapped package toward her. Just a little something to celebrate your first week of work. Daniel? You shouldn't have. He held up a hand. Let me do this, please. Sarah tucked the gift into her diaper bag, touched by his thoughtfulness. Mrs. Jenkins returned with Emily, who was starting to fuss. I think someone's ready for her afternoon nap, she said, carefully transferring the baby back to Sarah's arms. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, people started packing up. Sarah received countless hugs, Tupperware containers of leftovers, and promises to see her at church on Sunday. Daniel helped her fold up the blanket while Mrs. Jenkins packed up her diaper bag. Thank you, Sarah said softly to Daniel. For everything. He smiled, a gentle sadness in his eyes. You're doing all the hard work. I'm just glad to help where I can. The drive home with Mrs. Jenkins was quiet, Emily sleeping soundly in her car seat. Sarah watched the familiar buildings of her neighborhood pass by, no longer seeing them as symbols of her failure but as stepping stones toward stability. Back in her apartment, Sarah changed Emily into her pajamas, breathing in her sweet baby smell. The evening routine felt peaceful. A bottle, a lullaby, gentle rocking in the second-hand chair. Mrs. Jenkins had found for her. We're going to be okay, sweet girl, Sarah whispered, kissing Emily's forehead as she laid her in the crib. We're not alone anymore. She stood watching her daughter sleep, remembering the afternoon's warmth and acceptance. Emily's tiny chest rose and fell steadily, her lips making small, sucking movements in her sleep. Sarah touched the mobile hanging above the crib, a gift from the church youth group, and smiled as the soft tinkling sound filled the room. Beyond her apartment's thin walls, footsteps echoed in the building's stairwell, but Sarah paid them no mind, lost in the peaceful moment with her sleeping child. The gentle hum of Emily's nightlight filled the apartment as Sarah changed her into soft pink pajamas. Her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The afternoon's church picnic had been perfect, full of laughter, friendship, and hope. Emily's tiny fingers curled around Sarah's thumb as she hummed a lullaby. You're my whole world, sweet girl, Sarah whispered, brushing her lips against Emily's forehead. Things are finally looking up for us. A sharp knock at the door made Sarah jump. She glanced at the clock. 8:00 p.m. Who would visit this late? The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Coming, Sarah called softly, not wanting to startle Emily. She placed her daughter carefully in the crib and hurried to the door. Through the peephole, she saw 2 women in business attire and 2 uniformed police officers. Her heart stopped. With trembling fingers, she opened the door, leaving the chain on. Sarah Mitchell? One of the women held up an ID badge. I'm Karen Weber with Child Protective Services. We need you to open the door. Sarah's mouth went dry. What is this about? We have a court order to remove Emily Mitchell from your custody, pending investigation of neglect allegations. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She couldn't breathe. No, there must be some mistake. I'm taking good care of her. I have a job now. And support. Ma'am, please open the door, or we'll have the officers remove it. Sarah's legs barely held her as she unlatched the chain. The CPS workers pushed past her, heading straight for Emily's crib. The police officers stayed in the doorway, watching with stern faces. "Wait," Sarah's voice rose in panic. "Please, let me at least read the papers first." Miss Weber thrust a stack of documents at her while her colleague lifted Emily, who began to wail. Sarah's eyes blurred as she tried to focus on the legal language. Words jumped out at her. Allegations of neglect, unsuitable living conditions, history of instability. This isn't true. Sarah's hands shook so hard she could barely hold the papers. Who filed these complaints? Was it the Prestons? "Please, you can't take her." Emily's cries grew louder as the second CPS worker wrapped her in a blanket. Sarah lunged forward, but one of the officers stepped between them. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Miss Mitchell," he said firmly. "She needs me." Sarah's voice cracked. "She's still nursing. Please, she's never been away from me." "We have formula, Miss," Weber stated coldly. "You'll be contacted about a hearing date. You can present your case to the judge then." Sarah watched in horror as they carried Emily toward the door. Her daughter's face was red from crying, tiny arms reaching out. The maternal instinct to protect her child overwhelmed all reason. Sarah darted around the officer, desperate to reach Emily. "No, Emily," she screamed. "Give me my baby." The officer caught her arms, holding her back. Sarah struggled against his grip, her legs giving out as Emily disappeared through the doorway. She collapsed to her knees, her screams echoing through the hallway. Apartment doors cracked open. Neighbors peered out, some recording with their phones, others quickly shutting their doors. Sarah barely noticed them. Her whole world had just walked out the door in a stranger's arms. The officers and CPS workers left without another word. Sarah crawled to the doorway, watching them descend the stairs with her precious baby. Emily's cries grew fainter until they disappeared entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah pulled herself up and stumbled back into the apartment. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She fell against Emily's crib, clutching the rails for support. The little mobile of stars and moons still twirled slowly overhead. The sheep-patterned blanket still lay rumpled where they'd taken Emily from it. With trembling hands, Sarah lifted the blanket to her face. It still smelled like baby powder and the lavender lotion she used after Emily's bath. Great, heaving sobs tore from her chest as she sank to the floor. "Please, God," she whimpered. "Please don't let them keep her. Please." She curled up against the crib, wrapping Emily's blanket around her shoulders. The night light cast shadows on the wall, shadows of the empty crib that should have held her sleeping daughter. Tears soaked into the carpet as Sarah's body shook with grief. Hours passed. Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. Moving would make it real. Speaking would make it real. The only sounds were her ragged breaths and occasional whimpers of Emily. The sky outside gradually lightened from black to deep blue. Dawn was approaching. Sarah hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Her baby was out there somewhere, probably terrified, wondering why her mama hadn't saved her. The thought brought fresh tears, though Sarah had thought she had none left. She pulled herself up into Emily's crib, curling around the blanket like it was her daughter's body. The bars pressed uncomfortably against her adult frame, but she didn't care. This was as close as she could get to Emily now. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Sarah's sobs had quieted to silent tears. She lay there, clutching the blanket, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The morning light revealed the scattered evidence of Emily's life. A pacifier on the changing table, tiny socks in the laundry basket, a stuffed giraffe on the floor. Her baby was gone. Morning sunlight tried to peek through Sarah's curtains, but she hadn't moved to open them. The apartment felt like a tomb, cold, dark, and empty without Emily's presence. The silence was deafening. No baby coos, no gentle breathing from the crib, no soft rustling of blankets. Just silence. Sarah sat on her couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her phone lit up again, the screen showing Daniel Harrington for the 10th time that morning. She stared at it until the screen went dark, then hugged her knees closer to her chest. Emily's yellow blanket lay crumpled beside her, still carrying that sweet baby smell. Sarah pressed it to her face, trying to hold on to whatever piece of her daughter she could. Her tears had long since dried up, leaving her eyes raw and burning. The morning light shifted to afternoon shadows. Sarah hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, except to use the bathroom once. Her phone kept buzzing. Text messages now joined the missed calls. "Sarah, please answer. Let me help you. We can fight this." She picked up the phone, then set it back down. What was the point? They'd taken Emily so easily, like she was nothing more than a piece of property to be claimed. The court order had looked so official, so final. All her progress, the job, the church support, the stable routine, meant nothing in the face of the Prestons' influence. A knock at the door startled her. "Sarah?" Mrs. Jenkins' worried voice carried through. "I brought you some soup, dear." Sarah didn't answer. After a few minutes, she heard Mrs. Jenkins sigh and place something outside the door. The old woman's footsteps retreated down the hallway. The afternoon dragged on. Sarah's stomach growled, but she ignored it. She wandered into Emily's room, touching the empty crib. The mobile above it, planets and stars that Emily loved to watch, hung motionless. Sarah remembered how Emily would reach for them, giggling when they spun. She picked up Emily's favorite stuffed elephant, the one she couldn't sleep without. Had the CPS workers let her take it? Was she crying for it now? The thought sent fresh pain through Sarah's chest. More texts arrived. "The church is praying for you. Don't give up hope. Let us help." Sarah turned her phone off completely. She couldn't bear their optimism, their well-meaning encouragement. They didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't had their child ripped from their arms while neighbors watched. They hadn't heard their baby's terrified cries fade down the hallway. The soup Mrs. Jenkins left grew cold outside her door. The sun set, casting long shadows through the apartment. Sarah moved from the couch to Emily's room and back, like a ghost haunting her own life. Every surface held memories. The kitchen counter where Emily would sit in her bouncer while Sarah cooked. The bathroom, where they had their nightly splash time routine. The living room rug where Emily had first rolled over. Now it all felt like a museum of loss. Night fell completely. Sarah sat in the darkness, not bothering to turn on any lights. The street lamps outside cast an eerie glow through the curtains. Cars passed below, their headlights making shadows dance across her walls. Her mind kept replaying the moment they took Emily. The official papers, the cold expressions, the helplessness as she watched them buckle her crying daughter into their car seat. She should have fought harder, should have run, should have done something, anything, different. A new knock came at her door, harder than Mrs. Jenkins' gentle tapping. "Sarah?" Daniel's voice was firm. "I know you're in there." Sarah didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you answer," he continued. "I'll stay here all night if I have to." She heard him slide down to sit against her door. A few minutes later, his voice came again, softer this time. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. Please don't shut us out." Sarah hugged Emily's blanket tighter, trying to block out his words. But Daniel kept talking through the door. "I know you're hurting. I know it feels impossible right now. But Emily needs you to fight. She needs her mother." The words pierced through Sarah's numbness. Emily needed her. And here she sat, hiding in the dark, giving up, shame mixed with her grief. "The Prestons think they've won," Daniel continued. "They think you'll give up now. Is that what you want?" Sarah's fingers clenched around the blanket. No, that wasn't what she wanted. But what could she do against their power, their money, their influence? "I failed her," Sarah whispered, though she knew Daniel couldn't hear through the door. His voice came again, patient and steady. "Sarah, I'm not moving from this spot. I'll talk to this door all night if I have to, but I'd rather talk to you." She could hear him shifting position outside, settling in for a long wait. The thought of him, successful, busy Daniel Harrington, sitting on her hallway floor in his expensive suit, almost made her laugh. Almost. "Remember what you said at the church forum?" he asked. "You said you'd do anything for Emily. Prove it. Open this door and fight." Sarah stared at the door, Daniel's words echoing in her mind. She remembered holding Emily at that forum, feeling strong and supported. She remembered the other mothers who shared their stories, their determination. She remembered her own voice, stronger than she'd known it could be. Heavy footsteps came down the hallway, probably one of her neighbors. She heard them pause, probably staring at the sight of Daniel sitting there. The footsteps continued on. "I brought dinner," Daniel said after a while. Real food, not that instant noodle stuff you keep in your cabinet. It's getting cold out here. Sarah stood up slowly, her joints stiff from sitting so long. She took one step toward the door, then another. Her hand rested on the doorknob. Emily believes in you, Daniel said softly. I believe in you too. Sarah's fingers tightened on the doorknob. The knocking on Sarah's door grew more insistent. She lay curled on her couch, Emily's yellow blanket clutched to her chest, trying to ignore the sound. But Daniel's voice carried through the thin wood, steady and determined. Sarah, I know you're in there. Please, we need to talk. Minutes passed. The knocking continued. Sarah pressed the blanket to her face, breathing in the fading scent of baby powder and her daughter's sweetness. Her chest ached with each inhale. I'm not leaving, Daniel called. I'll stay here all night if I have to. Something in his voice, raw desperation that matched her own, finally broke through her fog of despair. Sarah dragged herself up, her body heavy as lead, and shuffled to the door. She didn't bother checking her appearance. She knew she looked as broken as she felt. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there in his usual crisp suit, but his face was haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his silver hair was uncombed. He looked like he hadn't slept either. May I come in? He asked quietly. Sarah stepped back wordlessly, letting him enter. Empty baby bottles sat unwashed in the sink. Diapers and tiny clothes lay scattered where she'd dropped them after the CPS workers left. She couldn't bear to put them away. Daniel surveyed the darkness, then walked to the windows and opened the curtains. Warm evening light spilled in, making Sarah squint. He turned to face her, his expression grave but determined. You can't give up, he said simply. Sarah sank onto the couch, pulling Emily's blanket around her shoulders like armor. They took her, she whispered. Just like that. Like I was nothing. Like all my efforts meant nothing. I know. Daniel's voice cracked. He sat beside her, his shoulders slumped. I know exactly how it feels. That helplessness. That rage. That soul-crushing guilt. How did you survive it? Sarah asked. Losing your baby? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were heavy with decades of pain. I didn't. Not really. I buried myself in work, in success, in building this agency. I told myself I was helping other families, making adoption better, more ethical. He laughed bitterly. Instead, I became part of the same system that took my child. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. But I can't do it anymore. Not after meeting you and Emily. Not after seeing history repeat itself. Sarah stared at the folder. What is that? Evidence. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Years of documentation showing how the agency board has favored wealthy clients like the Prestons. Pressure tactics used on vulnerable mothers. Money changing hands to expedite adoptions. Even proof that the Prestons orchestrated this CPS complaint against you. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. This could stop them? It could. Daniel's jaw tightened. But using it means sacrificing everything I've built. My career, my reputation, possibly even facing legal consequences myself for not reporting these issues sooner. He turned to Sarah, his eyes fierce. But I'm ready to do it. I've lived with my regrets for 30 years. I won't add another one by failing you and Emily. Sarah's hands clenched around the blanket. Why? Why risk everything for us? Because it's right. Daniel's voice grew thick with emotion. Because, somewhere out there, my child grew up without me, just like I grew up without them. Because every time I look at Emily, I see the baby I lost. Because you deserve better than what happened to my girlfriend and me. He stood and paced the small living room, passion building in his words. The system is broken, Sarah. It preys on mothers like you, young, alone, struggling. It favors money over love, influence over real family bonds. The Prestons think they can buy Emily like she's a commodity. They think their wealth makes them more worthy parents than you. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, the first spark of fight returning. They're wrong. Yes, they are. Daniel knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. But challenging them means war. They'll fight dirty. They'll try to destroy us both. I'll lose everything I've worked for." His grip tightened. "But I don't care anymore. I'm tired of being part of the problem. Help me make this right, Sarah. Help me expose the truth and change things. Not just for Emily, but for every mother facing this choice." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of determination, of hope rekindled. She thought of Emily's sweet face, of other mothers facing the same pressure she had. She thought of Daniel's lost child, of 30 years of pain and regret. Sarah clasped Daniel's hand firmly, her voice growing stronger. "Then let's do it. For Emily. For your child. For every mother like us." Daniel's hands trembled as he sealed the manila envelope. Inside were documents showing years of preferential treatment, backroom deals, and suspicious donations from wealthy families to fast-track adoptions. He'd gathered them meticulously over the past week, working late into the night after everyone had left the office. The journalist, Maria Rodriguez from the Daily Tribune, sat across from him in the dimly lit coffee shop. Her dark eyes studied him intently as she sipped her Americano. "You understand what this means, Mr. Harrington? Once I publish this, there's no going back." "I understand." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "I've spent 20 years building this agency, but what we've become, it's not what I intended." Maria opened the envelope, her eyebrows rising as she scanned the first page. "The Prestons? They've been involved in 3 other rushed adoptions? All of them questionable. All of them involving single mothers, who later claimed they felt pressured." Daniel leaned forward. "And there's more. Check the financial records." The next morning, the story exploded across the city. "Adoption agency favoritism scandal," screamed the headline of the Daily Tribune. Below it, in smaller text, "Wealthy families accused of buying babies through donations." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Turn on the news." She sat on her bed, watching the morning news show as reporters clustered outside the Harrington Adoption Agency. The anchor's voice was grave. "Sources claim the prestigious agency has been accepting substantial donations in exchange for preferential treatment in adoption cases." Her hands shook as she watched the Prestons hurrying from their car to their lawyer's office, trying to shield their faces from cameras. For the first time since Emily was taken, Sarah felt a spark of real hope. But there was no time to celebrate. She had work to do. Mrs. Jenkins arrived at 9, carrying a thick folder. "I've got character reference letters from everyone at church," she announced, settling onto Sarah's worn couch. "Pastor Mike wrote a beautiful one about how you never miss a Sunday, even walking in the rain when your car broke down. Sarah's boss from the grocery store had written one too. Sarah Mitchell is one of our most reliable employees," it read. "She has never been late, always maintains a professional attitude, and customers regularly compliment her service." Even her neighbors contributed. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall wrote about how she often heard Sarah singing lullabies to Emily through the thin walls. Mr. Rodriguez Thompson from upstairs described helping Sarah carry groceries, and how she always made sure Emily was warmly dressed for the weather. Daniel arrived at lunch, his tie loosened and dark circles under his eyes. He'd been fielding calls from the board all morning. "They're furious," he said, managing a tired smile. "But they can't fire me yet. It would look too suspicious now." Sarah spread the documents across her small kitchen table, pay stubs from work, bank statements showing her careful budgeting, receipts from Emily's doctor visits proving she never missed a checkup. "Will it be enough?" she asked softly. "It has to be," Daniel replied. He pulled out his own contribution, a detailed statement about the agency's practices and his personal observations of Sarah's dedication as a mother. "The judge needs to see that you were targeted not because you're unfit, but because you stood in the way of a wealthy family's wishes." Throughout the afternoon, more news broke. Other mothers came forward with similar stories about the Prestons and other wealthy families. The agency's board called an emergency meeting. The Prestons' lawyer released a statement claiming they were innocent victims of a disgruntled employee's vendetta. But Sarah barely noticed. She was focused on preparing for tomorrow's hearing, rehearsing her statement with Mrs. Jenkins and Daniel. Her voice grew stronger with each practice run. "I am Emily's mother," she declared, standing straight and proud in her small living room. "I've worked hard to provide for her. I've built a support system. I've never given up, even when it seemed impossible. I love my daughter, and I'm fighting for her, because that's what mothers do." As evening fell, Daniel and Mrs. Jenkins finally left. Sarah's apartment felt emptier than ever, without Emily, but somehow less hopeless than before. She'd taped a recent photo of Emily to her bedroom mirror, her baby girl laughing in the church nursery, reaching for the camera with chubby hands. Sarah changed into her pajamas and knelt beside her bed, just as she had every night since Emily was taken. But tonight's prayer was different. Her voice trembled with emotion as she whispered into clasped hands. "Dear God, please give me strength tomorrow. Not just for me, but for Emily. For every mother who's been told she's not good enough. Help me show them that love matters more than money. That being a good mother isn't about having the biggest house or the fanciest clothes." Tears rolled down her cheeks, dropping onto her folded hands. "Please, God, help me bring my baby home." The marble columns of the courthouse loomed over Sarah as she walked up the steps, her legs shaking beneath her simple navy dress. Mrs. Jenkins walked beside her, squeezing her hand. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered stone, and Sarah could see television crews setting up their equipment near the entrance. Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches stretched in neat rows. The Prestons sat in the front row, Mrs. Preston in an expensive cream suit, her husband in charcoal gray. Their 3 lawyers arranged papers at their table, speaking in hushed tones. Sarah's stomach churned as she took her seat. The room smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. She hadn't seen Emily in 5 days, the longest they'd ever been apart. Her arms ached to hold her baby. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Matthews entered, his black robes swishing as he took his place at the bench. The Prestons' lead attorney, Mr. Harrison, began his opening statement with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, this case is about what's best for an innocent child. We will prove that Miss Mitchell's unstable living situation and questionable judgment make her an unfit mother. The Prestons can provide Emily with every advantage, the finest schools, medical care, and opportunities Miss Mitchell simply cannot offer." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap as Harrison called his first witness, her former landlord, who detailed late rent payments and complaints about Emily's crying. Next came a social worker who'd visited her apartment, describing the sparse furnishings and nearly empty refrigerator. When Sarah took the stand, her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the oath. Harrison approached, his smile cold. "Miss Mitchell, isn't it true you were fired from your last job for excessive absences?" I missed work when Emily had bronchitis," Sarah said. "She needed me. And you have no savings? No college degree? No family support?" "No. But, in fact, your own parents want nothing to do with you, isn't that right?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They didn't approve of my pregnancy. But that doesn't mean—" "No further questions." Harrison cut her off with a dismissive wave. Sarah's court-appointed lawyer, Miss Chen, approached gently. "Sarah, please tell us about your daughter." Sarah took a deep breath, picturing Emily's face. "She's everything to me. The first time I held her, I promised I'd give her my whole heart, every day of her life. Yes, we've struggled, but I've never stopped fighting to give her better. I found a new job. I have wonderful people from church helping us. Emily is loved and cared for." Her voice grew stronger. "I know the Prestons can give her expensive things, but I can give her something money can't buy. A mother who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Who knows every expression on her face, every sound she makes, who will never stop showing her that she matters more than anything in this world." In the gallery, several people wiped their eyes. Even Judge Matthews leaned forward, listening intently. The afternoon brought more witnesses. Mrs. Jenkins, testifying about Sarah's dedication as a mother. Sarah's new boss, praising her work ethic. Then Daniel took the stand. He sat tall in his gray suit, his face grave. Harrison approached, confident. "Mr. Harrington, as CEO of the adoption agency, you initially approved Emily's placement with the Prestons, correct?" "I did," But I was wrong. Harrison paused. Wrong? Daniel's voice filled the courtroom. For years, our agency has given preferential treatment to wealthy clients like the Prestons. We've pressured vulnerable mothers to give up their children, ignored other qualified adoptive families, and looked the other way when donations mysteriously appeared in our accounts. Gasps echoed through the room. The Prestons' faces darkened with fury. I have documentation of every questionable placement, every coincidental donation. Daniel met the judge's eyes. Including records showing the Prestons made a $100,000 contribution to our board members' private accounts 3 days after Emily's case was opened. Judge Matthews' expression hardened. Harrison sputtered. Objection! These allegations are supported by evidence I've already submitted to the court, Daniel interrupted. He turned to Sarah. I lost my own child to this broken system years ago. I won't let it happen to another mother who loves her baby and is fighting to keep her family together. The Prestons' lawyers huddled in frantic whispers. Mrs. Preston dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief while her husband's face turned scarlet with rage. After redirect questioning and closing arguments, Judge Matthews surveyed the packed courtroom. This case has raised serious concerns that require careful consideration. I will review all evidence and deliver my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Court is adjourned. The bang of his gavel echoed like thunder. Sarah sat frozen as people filed out around her, her heart somewhere between hope and terror. Another night without Emily. Another night of waiting to learn if she would ever hold her daughter again. Mrs. Jenkins helped her stand on shaking legs. Come home with me tonight, dear. You shouldn't be alone. Sarah nodded numbly, barely registering Daniel's supportive squeeze of her shoulder or the reporter's shouting questions as she left the courthouse. All she could think about was Emily and the endless hours until morning. The tension in courtroom B was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every wooden bench was packed with spectators, church members, reporters, and curious onlookers. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Daniel and Mrs. Jenkins sat directly behind her, like faithful guardians. The Prestons occupied the other side of the courtroom, looking polished and confident in their expensive clothes. Their lawyer shuffled papers importantly, shooting occasional smirks in Sarah's direction. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. He was an older man with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked down at the papers before him, then removed his glasses and surveyed the room. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, he began, his voice firm and clear, including the troubling documentation of inappropriate influence within the Harrington Adoption Agency, this court finds no basis for the removal of Emily Mitchell from her mother's custody. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Jenkins gripped her shoulder. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court finds the allegations of neglect to be not only unsubstantiated but deliberately manufactured to manipulate the system. He fixed a stern gaze on the Prestons, who suddenly looked less confident. The actions taken by certain parties in this case have been, frankly, disturbing. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as the judge's words sank in. She was getting Emily back. She was keeping her baby. This court orders the immediate return of Emily Mitchell to her mother's custody. Judge Thompson's gavel came down with a decisive crack. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Mrs. Jenkins burst into tears, wrapping her arms around Sarah. Daniel closed his eyes, a mix of relief and resignation on his face. His career was over, but Emily was going home where she belonged. The Prestons' lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, we intend to appeal. You may file whatever you wish, Counselor. Judge Thompson cut him off sharply. But Emily Mitchell will be returned to her mother today. Court officers, please escort Mrs. Mitchell to collect her daughter. Sarah could barely stand. Her legs felt like jelly as a kind-faced female officer helped her up. The walk to the side room where Emily was being held with a social worker seemed to take forever and no time at all. When the door opened and Sarah saw Emily in the social worker's arms, her heart nearly burst. Her baby girl was wearing the yellow onesie Sarah had bought her at the church rummage sale, her dark curls wild around her face. Mama! Emily reached out with both arms, her face lighting up. Sarah rushed forward, gathering Emily into her arms. She buried her face in her daughter's neck, breathing in the sweet baby smell she'd missed so desperately. "My baby, my sweet baby," she sobbed, rocking Emily back and forth. "Mama missed you so much." Emily patted Sarah's wet cheeks with her tiny hands, babbling happily. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, her cheeks, her little hands. Every inch of her perfect face that Sarah had feared she might never see again. When they returned to the courtroom, Emily secure in Sarah's arms, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The Prestons were gone, their lawyer hastily packing his briefcase. Church members were hugging each other, some wiping away tears. Mrs. Jenkins beamed through her own tears, immediately coming over to coo at Emily. Daniel stood slightly apart from the crowd, his face showing the complex mix of emotions he felt. When Sarah approached him, Emily squirming happily in her arms, he gave them a sad smile. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, "for everything, for risking everything." Daniel reached out and gently touched Emily's cheek. "It was worth it," he said simply. "This is how it should have been, all those years ago. Someone should have fought for us like this." The bailiff approached them. "Miss Mitchell, there are reporters outside. Would you like an escort to your car?" Sarah nodded gratefully. As they made their way through the courthouse halls, she could hear the commotion outside growing louder. Mrs. Jenkins and Daniel flanked her protectively as they pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Camera flashes exploded around them. Reporters thrust microphones forward, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. "Miss Mitchell, how do you feel about the ruling? Mr. Harrington, will you be resigning from the agency? What do you have to say to the Prestons?" Sarah didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She just held Emily closer, shielding her face from the cameras. As they descended the courthouse steps, she leaned down and whispered into her daughter's ear, her voice thick with joy and relief. "We're going home, baby." Emily snuggled into her shoulder, and Sarah felt the rightness of it all the way down to her bones. This was how it should be. This was what she'd fought for. This was love winning over money, truth winning over power, a mother's heart winning over everything. The walk to Mrs. Jenkins' waiting car felt like a victory march. Every step took them further from the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks, closer to the future they deserved. Sarah didn't know exactly what that future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She and Emily would face it together. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse victory. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Sarah's small but tidy apartment, casting warm shadows across the freshly painted walls. The place wasn't fancy, but it felt like home, really felt like home. For the first time since Emily was born, Sarah hummed softly as she folded tiny onesies on the coffee table. The steady rhythm of the washing machine down the hall provided a comforting background noise. Emily lay on her playmat nearby, batting at colorful hanging toys and cooing to herself. The peaceful scene was a far cry from those desperate days just weeks ago. A gentle knock at the door made Sarah smile. She already knew who it was. Daniel always knocked the same way. 3 soft taps followed by 2 quick ones. "Come in," she called out, setting aside a half-folded blanket. Daniel entered, looking different from the stern CEO she'd first met at the adoption agency. He wore casual khakis and a blue button-down shirt, his silver hair slightly tousled from the autumn wind. Under his arm he carried a worn leather briefcase stuffed with papers. "Look who's here, Emily," Sarah said, scooping up her daughter. Emily's face lit up at the sight of Daniel, her little hands reaching toward him. "There's my favorite girl," Daniel chuckled, setting his briefcase down to accept the squirming baby. Emily immediately grabbed for his tie, a habit that always made him laugh. "She's getting bigger every time I see her." Sarah watched them with a full heart. It was strange how life worked sometimes, how the man she'd once feared would help take her baby away had become such an important part of their lives. "Coffee?" she offered, already heading to the kitchen. The new coffee maker, a housewarming gift from the church ladies, gurgled to life. "Please," Daniel replied, settling into the worn but comfortable armchair with Emily. The chair had been another donation, part of the flood of support that had poured in after the court case. The church community had rallied around them, bringing furniture, clothes, and more importantly, friendship. Sarah returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting them on the small side table. The coffee table Daniel had helped her pick out at a second-hand store now held not just laundry but framed photos, Emily's first smile, Sarah's new job ID badge, and a group picture from church. "How's the new job going?" Daniel asked, accepting his coffee with his free hand while expertly balancing Emily with the other. "Really good," Sarah replied, her voice warm with pride. "My manager said I might be up for a promotion to shift supervisor soon." She tucked her legs under her on the couch, savoring the moment. "It's such a change from before. Having people believe in me, you know?" Daniel nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Speaking of believing in people, he reached for his briefcase, carefully shifting Emily to his lap. "I wanted to show you something." He pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them across the coffee table after Sarah cleared away the laundry. They were applications, testimonials, and success stories, all from the new nonprofit he'd started after leaving the adoption agency. "These are just from our first month," he explained, pointing to various documents. "Single mothers who needed help with childcare, job training, legal assistance. We've already helped 15 families stay together." Sarah's eyes welled up as she read through the stories. So many women like her, fighting to keep their children, finding hope and support instead of judgment and pressure. "This one," Daniel said softly, pulling out a particular file, "reminded me so much of you. Young mother, no family support, desperate for a chance. We helped her get into a vocational program. She starts next week." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I can't believe how much you've accomplished already." "We've accomplished," Daniel corrected gently. "Your story, your courage. It's what inspired all of this. You showed me there was a better way." Emily chose that moment to let out a big yawn, her tiny face scrunching up adorably. Sarah glanced at the clock. Almost bedtime. "Here," Daniel said, standing carefully with Emily. "Let me help you get her ready for bed." They moved to Emily's room, where the beautiful wooden crib, another gift from the church, stood by the window. The walls were painted a soft yellow, decorated with paper butterflies the Sunday school children had made. A handmade quilt from Mrs. Jenkins draped over the railing, and a small nightlight cast gentle stars across the ceiling. Sarah changed Emily into her pajamas while Daniel prepared a bottle. They had fallen into an easy routine during his visits, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of family. When Emily was ready, Sarah settled into the rocking chair, another precious gift from the church community. As she fed Emily her bottle, Sarah looked around the cozy nursery, remembering the bare, cold room it had been just weeks ago. Now, it was filled with love, safety, and hope. Everything she'd dreamed of giving her daughter but hadn't thought possible. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're really here," she whispered, watching Emily's eyes grow heavy. "That we made it." Daniel stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by the setting sun. "You made it because you never gave up. You fought for what was right." "We fought," Sarah corrected, echoing his earlier words. She gently transferred the sleeping Emily to her crib, tucking the quilt around her tiny form. "I never could have done it without you." As she gazed down at her peacefully sleeping daughter, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Turning to Daniel, who had become so much more than just an ally, she whispered, "You didn't just save us, you gave us a future." Daniel smiled, and in that smile was the peace of a man who had finally found his own redemption. In helping Sarah and Emily, he had begun to heal the wounds of his own past. The circle was complete. Through the window, the last rays of sunlight painted the room in soft gold, a fitting end to another blessed day in their new life. Emily slept on, safe and secure, while 2 people who had once been strangers, now bound by something stronger than blood, watched over her with grateful hearts. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Sarah Mitchell, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.